All right, welcome back, everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors. Glad to have you back for another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. And as always, joined by Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors. Kevin, glad to have you here.
It's great to be back with everybody.
All right, and our one of our favorite guests and frequent guests, Governor Bob Wise, bringing us some federal knowledge this week. Governor Wise, glad to have you here.
It's always good to be back and stay humble, predicting what the White House and Congress will do.
Hey, we were saying before, it makes for better news stories when these things kind of drag on, although it makes us a little anxious, so we definitely want some resolution. But glad you're here to share some wisdom. Also, just want to remind everybody that if you enjoy these broadcasts, please click the subscribe button, and our editor is going to put a little fancy subscribe button right over my finger, I hope. We'll see if that works. But please subscribe and share. You're our marketing team. We appreciate you supporting us in that. So with that, Kevin, we have a lot of news in California right now, in Sacramento in particular. End of session last week. What's some of the aftermath? Can you kind of tell us what's been going on there?
Well, one of the things that we outlined actually in last week's broadcast was the content of SB 820, which was the trailer bill that cleaned up from the Budget Act that had been passed, more than almost 2 months ago. And so there were a number of issues, and we kind of went through a number of them, but I wanted to just point out one other thing that was in there, and that was that the shift in the use of some of the lottery dollars. As people might know, there was a Proposition 20 at one point, and that particular legislation authorized the use of up to half of the growth and lottery funds from one year to the next to be used for instructional materials only. That fund now is basically cracked open to be used for devices and connectivity. And so that is in this trailer bill. Again, the trailer bill has not been signed by the governor yet, but it's anticipated he will sign this. There are some murmurs out there that because that was enacted as a result of a ballot measure, that you could end up having some folks, particularly our friends in the publishing industry, challenge that particular provision. But we'll end up seeing what happens with that. But at the moment, we wanted folks to know, particularly everybody that's focused on our broadcast, on the blend between politics and tech, that's a really relevant issue. If you didn't have enough money with $5.3 billion to be able to spend on technology, now you're going to open up that potential with lottery funds. The thing that's important here is that a lot of those federal funds obviously go away once you burn through them. But this change with regard to the Lottery Act in interpreting devices and connectivity as part of instructional materials is something that's an important longer term change. So I wanted to mention that one issue.
Thanks, Kevin.
So, Kevin, a quick question. Is there a sunset on that provision?
I don't believe there is.
Okay.
Checked it, but we'll double check it and make sure. If there is one, we'll note it in the attachments and stuff that we put at the foot of this broadcast landing page.
Well, I just want to say we often complain that they're not updating legislation to meet the day. And here's an example of government doing just that. So we have to give the folks credit for being creative with those ongoing funds. And so now I'm more compelled to go buy a lottery ticket to help make things a little bit better. But with that, Kevin, as well, we've talked a little bit before the broadcast about the new budget trailer bill, SB 820. We talked about it last week. Could you tell us more as more information's come out about that in the last week?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's basically it. That was one of the provisions of the bill. There are a number of other things that are in the bill that are still, it's not perfect. It's not what everybody wanted, but they did cover quite a broad range of issues that have been raised by K-12 in the months ensuing from when we got the budget first passed. So there's child care funding issues. There's the ADA growth issue. Again, that issue's got some controversy still. There's the Williams Act piece. There's the timelines for the expenditure of funds. I talked about those on the last broadcast a little bit. And then the use of federal funds. Some of the one-time money that we're getting that's related to coronavirus can now be used for health and safety. That wasn't as explicit in the prior authorization under the budget. So a number of these issues are together, and we've got those all addressed. Okay. There were a couple of other issues that were part of this wrap-up of the end of session, again, that concluded. So the end of a 2-year legislative session is what we had happen basically Monday night. And so the other couple of issues that I wanted to mention, Tim, and I think you were going there, was one piece of legislation by Dr. Shirley Weber. It's AB 1835. It's been watched by the education community, opposed by some of the statewide education groups, including CASBO, because it would have the effect of being more restrictive on your budgets. And in a time when we're having a lot of difficulty with regard to finances, we can tell that it's going to be, choppy roads ahead for sure with regard to what we're looking at fiscally. The idea of restricting us anymore is something that obviously some people did not like. But what Dr. Weber was trying to get at was the idea that with supplemental and concentration grant funds, the idea that ending balances at the end of the year, in a year when you would otherwise have that money be restricted, when you have an ending balance, you go to the next year, suddenly it's unrestricted. It creates an incentive for people to hold back on spending these dollars for the kids who help generate the dough. So she wanted to plug that particular problem. The bill now sits on the governor's desk. I know that folks at the State Board of Education and the administration generally has not wanted to do lots of changes relative to the local control funding formula and the LCAP and some of the rules around this money. But I think there's a probably pretty decent chance the governor signs this bill. So we'll see what happens with that in pretty short order.
Okay, well, thanks for the update there, Kevin. And the other change, and I think one of the things you wanted to chat about, AB 331, the Ethnic Studies Bill. Can you talk a little bit about the implications of that long term?
Yeah, Assemblymember Jose Medina authored that legislation, and it was thought to actually be dead for the year. But obviously, given a lot of what's been going on across the country and even in California, the timing was right for the bill to get sort of resurrected. And Assemblymember Medina moved the bill, successfully getting it passed. What it has is a mandate that now sort of matches up with a mandate that already passed, was already signed by the governor for the California State University system that says you've got to take a class in ethnic studies in order to get a bachelor's degree at the CSU level. We're now going to have this requirement in order for kids to get a diploma. That kicks in the 2025-26 school year. We will have to be offering courses that match those requirements for ethnic studies that will be prescribed by the State Board of Education. And then by the 2029-30 school year, that will be the first year that kids will not be able to graduate without having that course taken and completed. So, so you've got this new addition sort of the mix in terms of graduation requirements. So yeah, we did want to spotlight that.
All right. Well, Kevin, thanks very much for the info there, and yeah, quite a few big changes happening right now. Let's change gears over to DC and Governor.
Wait, before we go, could I ask Kevin a question?
Please, please.
Kevin, you've been the one following the U.S. Department of Agriculture and the extension of feeding programs. What's happening there? I know there's been some developments.
So we did get some news on Monday, and we did share it out with a bunch of our clients. And I think it's becoming well known in California because that good news did travel pretty fast, which is that the secretary, the agricultural secretary, Sonny Pardue, did announce on Monday. No surprise here, he did it in Georgia, which is the state that he was the governor of. And I'm not sure when he served as governor if you guys overlapped at all, but
yes, we did.
So I'm sure you're familiar with him personally. But anyhow, he did actually approve this. He had been really sympathetic to the idea of the waiver that would continue to let us feed all kids, regardless of sort of the qualifications they have, by an extension of that summer meals program. So it did get extended. They had said that while they supported it, they really wanted Congress to do it. So there were several different ways we were working on it. As you well know, Governor, we were trying to get it in that fifth round of stimulus. We also had language in the agricultural appropriations bill. There was also separate legislation. There were several tracks working on trying to get that extension. And I think what the secretary decided was this wasn't going to happen anytime soon. School districts really needed it. He has the legal authority to do it. So he actually ended up making it happen. What he has called for, though, and hopefully it'll be included if we ever get to stimulus, which you can talk about, that there would be clarifying language in that bill that backs up the secretary's move with the funding to make sure that we don't have any kind of shortfalls in the dollars to make that program work. But I appreciate you bringing it up.
Well, thanks, Kevin, and thanks, Governor Weiss, for bringing that up, important issue up. And one of the things we've been talking about for quite a while is stimulus, and we're a little bit of a broken record on this one, but we keep hearing news. It might happen, big or small. I know Congress is coming back this week. Can you talk a little bit about what you're expecting to see when folks come back?
So I'm taking off my former governor's hat and putting on my former members of Congress hat. And once again, as I said, often humbled because you can try to predict what Congress is going to do, and then it fools you. So let's do a quick recap. When last we were together, Congress had just gone home for the August recess several weeks ago, and had, against all predictions, gone home without passing a stimulus bill, particularly one that affected education. And so the Senate returns September the 8th next week, the House shortly thereafter. But the good news is that some negotiations have been quietly taking place. And despite what you may see or read in the news, people calling each other terrible names and things, negotiations have been underway. So let's do a quick recap. When we left, the House had already passed something called the HEROES Act. I'm going to do a little air graphic. So the HEROES Act was $3.4 trillion. The Senate the Senate Republicans discussing, but in some disagreement, a $1 trillion. So here we are, 3.4, 1 trillion. Right before they broke, Speaker Pelosi in the House brought it down to 2.4 trillion. She dropped $1 trillion off. Still no deal. Everybody goes home, negotiations stop for a while. Now, the White House, in just the last week or so, has brought it up to $1.3 trillion. So we have essentially about $900 billion, which now in nowadays terms is not that far, maybe to you and me, but not that far in terms of federal spending. So we have about a $900 billion difference. That $900 billion difference is actually about what it is. That's the difference in what the House is saying for state and local funding, and the Senate is saying no deal. And so this is about where we are. And incidentally, somebody is now talking about a, quote, skinny bill that's $500 billion. But this is our difference that we're working with right now. So I think it's significant to note that in both versions, whether you're talking about all the House versions or the Senate version, or the White House version, they're all putting in about the same amount for education, roughly $100 billion. One version has $58 billion for K-12. The other version has $70 billion and some money for state and local aid to education. But they're all talking about the same amount for education. That, I think, is very significant. So they're coming back. Now, this is where it gets to be if you like Hogwarts and Harry Potter, this is not a two-dimensional, it's a three-dimensional game. It's Republicans and Democrats negotiating with each other. It is the House and the Senate, and it's the White House, and they're all flying around, and each one whipping in and out. So there's some other factors that are taking place. First of all, economic figures are not getting better. Yes, there's release today of unemployment numbers. Unemployment claims went down last week, but they also adjusted how they calculate them. And if you look at the number of people that are unemployed, it's about the same as it has been. So the pain is in terms of unemployment. Eviction moratoriums have expired. There's a new executive order out, but the unemployment checks are lower, and real pain is setting in. Second, the House and Senate, they've been home for 3 weeks. I remember what it's like to be home for 3 weeks over Labor Day, right before an election in which I'm got a real risk, and hearing people say you're not doing the job. And so they've been home for 3 weeks, and we have a number of senators, key Republican senators, that are up for re-election, plus a lot of House members, and they're saying to their leaderships, we need something done. For Pete's sake, let's get a bill that we can vote on. The third is that Congress is faced with, and I won't get into the intricacies, but before it leaves in late September, early October, it has to pass a temporary budget called a continuing resolution. And you don't want to get this item stirred into that one, because then it really gets messy with the negotiations. All of which is to say, great pressure on the Congress to pass a stimulus package. And the positive note is whether it's the very, very skinny to a much bigger one, the chances of having education in it, I think, are about 75% at least, if not more. Some key issues. How much does the White House demand of those education dollars go to school systems that are now in person in the school, as opposed to permitting the flexibility of school systems to be running distance learning, hybrid, and so on? Key issue when they went home in August. Second is, will there be separate funding for broadband and technology, or will there be that be left out and there just be, as Kevin just talked about in 820, Senate Bill 820, will there be additional flexibility to school systems to use the existing education dollars they're getting from the federal government? And finally, the courts have already taken care of a lot of the equitable services provision that was causing districts to have to allocate more money to private schools. That's probably off the board already. But my guess is Congress puts the final nail in that coffin in this legislation. So now, drum roll, please. In this game of Quidditch, my prediction. My prediction, or if baseball analogy, I'm up at the plate for my third strike. My prediction is there will be a slimmed down package that passes sometime in the third or fourth week of September. It will have education in it, probably in the amounts that the Senate has talked, Republicans have been talking about, and the House included. And so for district leaders, I think you can look towards more funding, federal funding coming for education. I'm not as strong predicting on what strings are going to be tied to it. And then where those provisions that get left out of the bill that's passed, that gives everybody a chance to say, we're going to take it to the voters. And depending on how they vote, we'll be back next year to get more. So in conclusion, district leaders should still be in constant contact with their representatives, because this is the last chance to really weigh in before this deal gets put together.
I had a couple of thoughts on this, Tim.
Please.
One is that we had seen an alert that Speaker Pelosi had put out. I think she put out to all her House colleagues about having them do events all around the country with their local school districts while they were on break. That did happen. In fact, we were in touch with a number of districts that were doing events with their members of Congress that were like webcast kinds of meetings with local education leaders. And then, of course, that information was translated to the local media so they knew these things were happening, to underscore the need for additional support. So that started happening. The one issue that you mentioned that I'm the most concerned about was the first of your critical issues that you mentioned, which are your first of your key issues, which was that dynamic about where the White House and I think Republicans have been, which is that they really want to tie any increased funding only to the schools that completely reopen for face-to-face instruction, which we really hope that does not prevail. And I realize it's a really tough political dynamic, but it really kind of in the state of California becomes largely useless because we are not, reopening fully for school districts all across the state. Now, we may, of course, by the end of the school year, get there. And if it's written in such a way that it allows that we would get all of our money if we're open for any part of the school year, that'd be great. But I have a funny feeling that's going to be a big sticking point in terms of the way we look at this issue, given the fact that Pelosi and the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, are both Californians. I'm suspecting that they are very aware of the fact that that provision would distinctly disadvantage the state of California.
Good, an excellent point. The California leadership in the House obviously is very, very powerful on that. And to your first point, Kevin, I just want to. It was first heard on this broadcast that about the need for district leaders to hold events with the congressional leaders. I'm glad to see the congressional leaders wanted to hold events with the district leaders.
Yes, no, good point. And that has been happening. And even when we called for it, it really did start. So as Speaker Pelosi called for this all across the country, we were pretty far ahead of the curve.
Yep.
And many Capitol Advisors clients know that, they were in touch with members of Congress. In fact, one little shout out is to the county superintendent in San Diego, Paul Gothold, who actually arranged a meeting with Congresswoman Susan Davis around that school nutrition issue, in addition to some of these other issues. And she took a major role in doing a Dear Colleague letter and getting some of the pressure built up that I think USDA ultimately felt. But she did a great job on that. And that was a great example of a school agency, in this case, the San Diego County Office of Education, initiating that call. That happened before the speaker did her call out. So all of it's good. And we, as you've mentioned, Governor, we do need to keep the pressure on. So more of those need to continue to happen.
Well, thanks you too, and I'll just pile on a little bit, Governor Wise, about you talked about the federal dollars that are needed to subsidize our distance learning efforts. Hopefully, we'll see some of that in E-rate reform, which we've been hearing about for quite a long time. There was actually a letter from the state of Colorado to the FCC, basically asking for a waiver. They just received 5 years of new E-rate money, but that's only to address their school district buildings and the connectivity between buildings. And what they asked for from DC was to allow them to address distance learning with those dollars. So, we're not sure if those additional dollars are going to come in some sort of additional E-rate, but they're saying, hey, the money that you just gave us, can we use that for distance learning? And I would encourage others to ask for the same. So if you haven't done so yet, we always say, make sure to make some noise. Now's the time to make noise. We do need additional E-rate dollars, but perhaps you could repurpose the dollars that you have if you ask for it to address these distance learning needs that everyone has right now. And with that, I want to just, because we've been running for quite a long time here, but I want to make sure, did I miss anything, Governor Wise, that you wanted to cover about DC? Any final thoughts that you want to wrap up with?
It's just going to be a lot of activity during the next month as people ramp up, try to cover their bases, get done what they have to get done, and get home to campaign. And as Kevin just said, the nice thing about video conferencing is you don't have to visit them in Washington anymore. Be setting up those video conferences now to get updates and also to keep pressing.
Great recommendation. Thanks again for being here. And Kevin, any final thoughts as we wrap up this week?
There was a thing I came across today. Actually, it was on a separate call that was really helpful, and we're going to provide a link to this week's broadcast on it. But it's a tool that Houghton Mifflin Harcourt put together that talks about specifically for California the learning continuity plans and how you sort of integrate that with what you're trying to do from an academic standpoint, particularly with regard to English learners. So we're going to put a link on there. You guys can check that out. I think you'll find it really helpful. Next week, we'll probably also have a link to some videos that they've done on asynchronous and synchronous instruction, effectiveness in coordinating those two things. So that's all I've got.
All right, Kevin, thanks very much. And just as we wrap up, I want to say thanks everybody for tuning in. Please take a moment, subscribe, share us on social media. We'd love to get that support from you. And as always, please send in any questions. We'll try to address them on the next broadcast. So have a wonderful rest of the week. We'll look forward to catching up with you soon. And thanks again, Governor Wise and Kevin. Looking forward to talking again soon.
Great. See you, gentlemen.
Take care.